Center for Development Studies. I would also like to welcome Manu Prathap, second MA Economics, student of the department, for delivering the vote of thanks for this section. Finally, I welcome each and everyone present here to the section 8 of International Webinar on Women and Development. Thank you.
Hello all. Since the moderator is having some internet connectivity issue, let me moderate the session. I would like to actually invite two presenters, especially Deepa and Aparajay from Madras Institute of Development Studies, as well as Shonima Nelliat from Center for Development Studies, Trivandrum. So both are actually going to look into the aspect of labor again, division of labor, and in that sense, first paper is on gendered paid care work in advanced capitalist country, lessons from United Kingdom and Denmark, and they are basically going to discuss about the capitalist classification of care. Work has been, especially women's work, has normally been, or the gendered classification of care work. So with this, let me invite Deepa to discuss about the gendered paid care work.
So good afternoon everyone present here. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity to present our views on this paper titled Gendered Paid Care Work in Advanced Capitalist Countries, Lessons from UK and Denmark. So there is a vast literature on unpaid care work, and comparatively the literature in the domain of paid care work is less. So this recent attention is because there is a very high percentage of women in paid care work sector, including paid domestic work. It is suggested in the literature that if care work shifts from being unpaid to paid work, either in the hands of market or the welfare state, the gender segregation would tend to largely disappear with the capitalist development. So in this context, scholars generally are in favor of adopting, Nordic model of welfare-based paid care work as opposed to market-based care work for the rapid increase in women's participation, in the workforce. So accordingly, in this paper, we have selected two advanced capitalist countries. One is the United Kingdom, where paid care work is mostly market-driven. And then the other is Denmark, where paid care work is mostly state-funded. Further, most of other literatures on care work are focused on either unpaid care work or the interlinkages, between unpaid care work and paid work, what women do. The reason behind this is that much of gender wage disparity prevalent in the society has been also traditionally linked to the overwhelming presence of women in unpaid care work. Women's lack of participation in paid work has also been found to be tied to them being burdened with unpaid care work at home. So this has been referred as unpaid care work, paid work, and paid care work circle. It has been generally argued that with the care work becoming paid, women would be able to participate more in labor market. So if we even look into the data for advanced capitalist countries where the care work has become largely paid, either by government or the private sector, we find that the percentage of women workers among the total labor force is above 46% for quite some time now. So, however, the point is often missed, although mentioned in the recent reports in ILO and the UN Women Report, is that the paid care work continues to remain overwhelmingly represented by women, even in advanced capitalist countries. Neither they probe deeply the gender composition of paid care work, nor they try to find explanation for this phenomena. In fact, lessening the time use gap in unpaid care work between men and women in Nordic countries and European countries, highlighted by other such reports, have helped policymakers gloss over the continued gender disparity of paid care work in these countries. So this can be observed, from this table, where we can see that both in the United Kingdom and Denmark, you see the percentage of women in all working persons is comparatively low when to the category of paid care work, where we see both in United Kingdom and Denmark, the presence of women in paid care works are more. So this has been recently kind of clearly showed in the report of UN Women, where women make up over 70% of paid care work in the majority of the report analyzes 47 countries, and over 80% of paid care work in 11 countries. It is also the case across most countries that women are far more heavily represented in care sector than in any other parts of labor market, with female representation hovering around 40% or low in non-care jobs in most countries. So here, when they look into care, the UN report or the ILO defines, care as much broader, which they even include sectors like health and education. For our definition purpose, what we have included is only those aspects of health and education which is directly linked to care, like nursing. For example, under health or education, like teachers and doctors, we have excluded that. So even if we adopt, so when we adopt more narrow definition of care work as only direct care related to nurturing, we find more than 90% of women are in this sector. So this is evident in the tables below, where, within even the categories, we see that categories like nursing, childcare, you see the percentage of women compared to kind of a jobs like ambulance staff, where the percentage of women is very less compared to nurturing kind of jobs. The same is being reflected in Denmark, which is basically state funded with respect to care work. We see that the healthcare, nursing, residential nursing care facilities, or even childcare, for private homes are overwhelmingly represented by women compared to dry cleanings. And you see this category funeral related activities, where you see very less compared to childcare in private homes and other categories similar to that. So the mainly, basically the care work sector is low paid. So in England, the recent reports also suggest that the wages of care work are extremely kind of low, especially to certain kind of care work, which is long-term care work, where they say, you take care of elderly for a longer period of time. It's specifically paid very low in England. However, if we compare the wages of care workers with non-care workers in Denmark, the situation is quite the same. The care workers are comparatively extremely low paid even in Denmark. As can be evidently seen from the table, from the wages, from the data for wages, what we saw is that the women's childcare workers were being paid hardly less compared to an average hourly wage in Denmark for women workers. So, how do we understand this? So, in the paid care work literature, rather than exploring the reasons behind the preponderance of women in paid care work, various explanations have been offered to explain the low pay of care, paid care workers, which includes, viewing care work as public good, which we would see the following. For example, scholars have argued that care is essentially a public good, which benefits even those who are not directly direct receiver of care. So hence the benefits out of care would always be underestimated and underpaid. So this public good view of care work favors state provisioning of care work, which is closer to the social democratic capitalism in countries like Denmark. However, as we have already seen in Denmark too, paid care work is one of the lowest paid work. So when we say there's another explanation termed as prisoners of love, argues that since some women derive intrinsic joy in taking care of others, the employers end up getting away by paying much lower pay for care work. But there is no evidence that women necessarily enjoy care work, and there are many other highly paid professions which give intrinsic joy to the workers. For example, artists or any other kind of work which that category. So the another argument which is placed is that I have argued that the greater the inequality in a country, it is easier for the rich to get domestic workers, care workers for low wage. So when we compare this, all Nordic countries are good counterexample because the inequality, compared to other countries, Nordic countries, inequality is very much less. And this arguments also holds for most low wage and not necessarily restricted to care work alone. So when we see the devaluation pieces, the gender gap primarily reflects in terms of wage being segregated along gender lines. Although the difference in pay across gender for the same work also exists, we are, I think, very much aware of this whole concept of, like the demand for same wage for same work by many feminist literature. So it is basically the patriarchal culture which devalues any work done predominantly by women, and the work like care work have low pay. So the cultural explanation is understandable, but it is not clear why advanced capitalist countries should continue to devalue paid care work. So what we understand is that this care work is basically understood larger under the larger social reproduction theory. So the notion of reproductive labor basically comes from the Marxist tradition and was first introduced by Engels to refer to activities involved in maintaining and reproducing the labor force. Social feminists later in 1970s used this concept of reproductive labor to underscore the role of unpaid domestic work in the larger economic system. So the social reproduction theory explains that women continue to bear the burden of unpaid care work under capitalism because that helps capitalism to reproduce labor law in cheapest way possible. This helps to keep the wages low and helps in maximizing the surplus value, which is, the profit. So with care work becoming increasingly paid, the logic of original social reproduction theory has been extended to the low wages in paid care work also. However, this economic explanation needs to be tied up with cultural devaluation of paid work, even in countries like Denmark. So for this, what this paper tried to look into is to invoke the theory of Nancy Fraser about the persistence of misrecognition and malnutrition under two-earner family of advanced capitalism. To understand why under capitalism, certain work like care work continue to be misrecognized as feminine work, which is then culturally devalued so that the malnutrition continues with wages remain low in care work sector. So the low wage in turn allows capitalism to continue to reproduce labor power at a very low cost to be able to keep the wages of all workers in the economy low and the profit high. The social democratic welfare states like Denmark is definitely a step ahead of market-oriented economies, of UK in ameliorating the condition of workers in general and women in particular. The women, especially working class, underprivileged, caste race, still continue to bear the burden of social reproduction of labor force for capitalism to thrive. It is true that in social democratic welfare countries like Denmark, compared to market-oriented countries like UK, the burden on paid working women and their household responsibilities is far less. Nevertheless, the structural problem of women bearing the burden of social reproduction of capitalism continues to hold with unpaid care work becoming paid care work. So in fact, the burden of care work is increasingly getting shifted from all women to women belonging to certain class, race, caste, ethnicity, etc. So what we would try to conclude is that if a developing economy like India want to avoid continuing in this path of regulating care work, whether paid or unpaid, women, then it needs to make a structural break from capitalism. Capitalism's necessity of keeping the reproduction of labor power cheap to keep overall wages low. Following Nancy Fraser, it can be inferred that the twin problem of maldistribution and misrecognition plaguing the care sector has to be broken down culturally and economically by going beyond the welfareization and formalization of the sector through Anganwadi, Balwadi, community kitchen, midday meal schemes, etc. So the welfareization and formalization can be the first step towards bringing participation parity, but the lack of participation parity, especially in terms of gender, may actually throw the sector into maldistribution and misleading, which characterizes even advanced capitalist, social democratic economics like Denmark. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deepa, for your presentation. Very brief and sharp presentation. Let me now invite Shonima Nelliat, a research scholar from Center for Development Studies, to discuss the topic, the gender division of labor, and overview of Indian women's time allocation. So we will reserve the question in the end of the presentation. Okay.
So the topic that I'm going to present here is the gender division of labor and overview of Indian women's time allocation. So in this paper and in this presentation, I try to critically analyze the gender division of labor in families, labor market, and workplaces in Indian context. So the presentation is organized into 3 segments. In the first segment, I review the existing theories and literature on the historical construction of gendered ideologies and discourse. In the second segment, I will analyze the exclusion and subordinate position of women in the country. And in the third portion, we will have a discussion on a time allocation of women compared with male counterpart using time use data and periodic labor force survey. So what is a gender role? So gender roles are socially constructed and culturally diffused roles and position of men and women in production and social reproduction. So in that sense, all gender roles are either ascriptive or bearer of power and hierarchy. The subordination of women is widespread in all societies and economic arrangement with different intensity. So the disproportion in the intensity depends on the mode of production, contribution and command over the subsistence or resources, work done in family and public sphere, etc. So in the case of historical root of gendered ideology, as Hartman says, the early process of sexual stratification and division of gendered labor established along with the primitive accumulation, whereas the existed society before the primitive accumulation was sexually egalitarian than the primitive accumulation era. So the primitive accumulation requisites specialization, productiveness, private property, family strategies, and all those things. And in that sense, surplus land and female fertility were important determinant in accumulation. And in that society, family was the locus of production and marriage was the foundation of family, and women were considered as tangible commodities and forbidden from learning skills, techniques, and etc. So in that sense, patriarchy as a social system that brings solidarity and material benefit for men predate capitalism. And during the era of industrialization, capitalism, this thing introduced wage labor. So in that sense, capitalist mode of production were supposed to be the pioneer production mode, which do not classify workers into hierarchy. But in fact, capitalism in the sense of ideal character did not come into existence ever, whereas the distinctive capacity of capitalism to extract the surplus value is its intelligent and purposive character that exploits socio-cultural condition to enhance productivity. So by that time, two compatible identities and spaces institutionalized. In the case of space, public sphere that runs with self-interest and coordinate through markets, rules, and laws. And in the case of private sphere, the interest of private sphere or household is pure altruism and is directed by norms. In the case of dual identities, female and male, and in the case of female, motherhood was celebrated as a core feature of femininity, and with the characters like purity, domesticity, and all those things. And in the case of men, men were considered to be as guardian, aggressive, competitive, and sexual. So the responsibility to warrant the social and personal morality inside the home and in a society fall on women. And the purity of women and the monogamy were imperative for control over women's sexuality. So this kind of relation that secure the patrilineal inheritances and market expanded the cost of, expanded the imputed cost of women domesticity and subsidized works of housewife. So At the same time, important thing is that the dual identities and dual spaces were not static in all classes. For example, the condition of working class women is slightly different. And in the case of sub-Saharan Africa, the society was much more sexually egalitarian society. But at the same time, the colonial education, colonial laws, and colonial judiciary, and the school of thoughts like neoclassical school of thoughts, other school of thoughts in social sciences, all those things spread the idea of a gendered, they spread the gendered ideas and ideology. So in that sense, historical reading says gendered identities evolved and regenerated by the interaction of practice, ideologies, and discourse. The patriarchal mode of, like Valby said, the patriarchal mode of production, patriarchal relation in paid work, the patriarchal affiliation in the state, male violence, and patriarchal alliance in sexuality, and patriarchal lineage in the institutions like religion, media, education, that reinforces the segregation. And in paid, in the case of paid employment, the wage differential and inferior position insists partial dependence on men's wage and push them into domestic spheres as reserve army of labor. In the case of labor market, the superior organizational power of male workers and union, they utilize the idea of job segregation, skill classification to bring the best paid work for men. So gender descriptive relation like marriage, family, they explicitly encourage the subordination of hierarchy. At the same time, the non-gendered descriptive relation, they all carries the gendered ideas and they act as a bearer of a gender. So in the case of India, of course, in India, women hold multiple identities subject to the class. In the case of India, women hold multiple identities subject to class, caste, religion, ethnicity, age, and race. Another important thing in India is that the proper distinction or proper demarcation between private and public space is not established in Indian society even yet. To some extent, it is more or less similar with the observation of Nirmala Banerjee, because the private patriarchy in Indian scenario, the public patriarchy in Indian scenario is the extension of private patriarchy. Precisely, the private patriarchy is deep-rooted in Indian household, and this is reinforced with the help of male and female members, and the interlinkage between private and public patriarchy enormous in India other than in the Western world. So we know that the labor and work participation in Indian scenario is very bad, and there are various theoretical explanations for that trend, including U-shaped feminization hypothesis, defeminization hypothesis, status projection hypothesis, and all these theories acknowledge the gender division of labor. But in India, the status projection hypothesis and upward social mobility are the foremost drivers of women's exclusion from the labor market. And in the case of India, the fallback position of women is much more bad than other global scenario. So in the case of a time, as Moses says, the women in third world countries, they carries a triple responsibility in productive, reproductive, and community level. In India, the domestic responsibility of women include activities in household, caring for family members, child rearing, engaging in free collection of goods, including vegetables, roots, water, cattle food, firewood, assisting family businesses, and agricultural activities, sewing, tailoring, and weaving for household members. In the case of community level responsibility, women are largely volunteer workers, and they engage in collection of common good, or they carry out the community level caring activities, particularly as frontline care workers. So the exclusion of women from paid work is so much associated with the women's unpaid domestic and community level responsibility. Another important thing is that these activities are unpaid activities and they do not count under the labor classification, and they account in code number 92 or code 93 of NSSO. The code 92, it stands for domestic unpaid activities, and code 93 include raw material and domestic item collection. So in that sense, the female are neither working nor available for work during these hours. But in fact, these activities are crucial because these are subsidized work and this enable the productive sector to work efficiently. So when we include code 92 and code 93 and code 97, this give different results. Like Jayanti Ghosh estimates that if we include these codes, then a woman works much longer than male counterparts, and there exists a time poverty for Indian female because NSSO 2014 notes that the average time for reaching water resources is 12 minutes and collecting water from public resource is 15 minutes, which means this creates a time poverty for Indian women. So in the case of labor market, the working participation of female and female labor force participation shows that the ST, SC are the larger social category in female labor force. The other category includes the upper caste, which is the minor participant in a labor market. The stigmatization of female labor participation is much prevalent in upper caste social category. So figure 1 shows the working participation of women and figure 2 shows the female labor force participation, and both figure shows lower participation rate of women compared with the male. And in the case of a distribution of work, it shows that in rural area, majority of the female workers are self-employed. At the same time, in urban settlement, majority of the workers are regular employed workers. However, the existing literature says the private casual works and the wage gap in casual work have recently increased in Indian labor market. So what is the importance of time use data? So time use data is the only official database that acknowledges the activities of women. So of course, there are some limitation like lacking in depth clarity of care work and all those things. But at the same time, the time use data acknowledge all the activities, and this activities include employment and related activities, production of goods for on use, unpaid domestic services for household members, unpaid service for household, unpaid volunteer activities, trainee, other unpaid works in community, learning activities, socializing and communication activities, religious participation, participation in cultural, leisure, sports activities, hours spent for mass media usage, hours spent for self-care and self-maintenance. So this is the graph. So the percentage share of unpaid and paid activities in total time spent in a day by person of different age group in rural and urban area shows that irrespective of group, region, irrespective of age, female engage in unpaid activities, and on an average 85.8% of activities are done by female above the age 15 years is unpaid works. In contrast, the activities that males involve, majority of the works are paid activities in most of the time, and only 23% activities comes under unpaid activities. So these results are much less when we compare. I mean, these unpaid activities are much less in working age categories in case of men. So when we have a detailed analysis of this graph, these two graphs shows the average time spent in different activities in a day by a person. This is the rural graph and this is the urban graph, and the we can see the gender gap in paid and unpaid residual activities. So on an average, 263 minutes in a day, males spend for employment and related activities. Women in contrast spend only 61 minutes on an average for paid employment and related activities. The residual activities refers to learning, education, socializing, communication, community participation, religious practices, self-care, self-maintenance, cultural activities, etc. So the gap is visible, and gap is much wider in learning and socializing activities like community participation, religious participation, and communication. Why these activities are important? Because these activities are some of the major drivers which can influence the labor market, or which can influence the social capital, social network, connectivity, and employment. So the lion's share of time, or lion's share of their day, Indian women spend for unpaid domestic activities by engaging in food and meals management, cleaning, maintaining house, and all those things. And the hours-based detail says that Indian women on an average spend 243 minutes for these activities, whereas the men, they hardly spend for this kind of activity, and this is 25 minutes. So another disproportionate distribution is in unpaid domestic services for household, and in that sense, women spend too much of her time to care, to distribute, or to render care for dependent adults. So this paper confirms the unequal and unwelcoming gender relation in division of labor in family, labor market, and workspace. The gender discourse and ideologies in the country are, this reinforce the gender role. The anti-evaluation, devaluation, and exclusion of women are all this persist in the society, and they reinforce the gender role. And in Indian scenario, private and public patriarchal norms, private and public patriarchal norms, market and state expropriate the time and create a time poverty, and women are the, they face severe time poverty than male counterparts. So that's all. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Shonima, for making a presentation. Now, let's have a discussion on the two papers, gender paid care work as well as the gender division of labor, presented by both the presenters. Well, I would like to actually ask a very simple question to Deepa. Basically, that is on your conclusion. That is, you made a point that we have to de-link the production system or the economy or the care work from the capitalist structure. So how do we do that? And whether do we have an alternative in that sense? Even the reference which you made is also a social democratic setup. That is also part of the capitalist structure, and which is also within the capitalist structure. So when we make a point of delinking ourselves from capitalist production structure, is it actually possible? Or even if it is possible, how it has been materialized? Thank you. For Shonima, again, thank you. And I have no question. So I will discuss you with the paper later. And now the floor is also open for question. Meanwhile, Deepa, if you are okay, then you can respond.
Yeah. So thank you for the observation and the question, Siddik. Yeah. So yes, we are trying to look into what are the alternatives, because when we see two capitalist countries, but both adopting different kinds of economic system to actually address this question of care work. One, UK, we see it's market driven, and Denmark, which is welfare state. The Nordic countries are like known for their welfare measures, especially in this domain. Both, but still there is a continuity of the women overwhelmingly present in care work, one, and then the wages are very low. So it is obviously, like you have to question this existing system to actually kind of bring in more value to the care work, one, and also to increase their wage. But what we also observe is that within the system, it's very important this wage is low, kept low, so that like this that's what the social reproduction theory actually kind of tells us very clearly, that this whole reproductive labor, like the reproductive labor, when we actually kind of need that, if you have to pay for that, then the wages have to increase, the profit is going to go down. We know this whole thing, increase in profit is very important, the wages have to be low. So it is very much interlinked within the system. So yes, we have to question it. It is kind of more discussion needed, and I think there is lots of scope for us to expand. But right now, what we can kind of say, basically, like feminist economists are for a very long time advocating sharing of household work, sharing of care work within the household, initially at least, like not women to be the sole responsible kind of a person who does all the household work at home, and then obviously, when it's done paid, that continues. So there should be a very clear change in, understanding care work, which is not should be seen as a feminine work. We should be able to understand how it is very important for maximizing the profit of the present system. And then, like kind of annihilation of this whole understanding, which is towards feminization of feminine work, and then take up, part of a work, any work, and it should be divided with all family members. Maybe that could be a good start, but then it's a very long debate forward. So I have my co-author also in the session. I think if he wants, he can also add up to the question.
Yeah, if I can just, I think most of the things she has already spoken about it. I think we have also said in our conclusion that something about participation parity, which is a Nancy Fraser's concept only, that which is basically bringing about an equal participation in most all the spheres that she talks about. So there is no reason why both culturally as well as economically, government not to, especially say in a social democratic countries, not go ahead with the capitalist logic. Even if you're not going away with the capitalism, do not go ahead with the capitalist logic of having women only do the care work. Because we see even in something like dental nurse, dental nurse which faces both men and women patient, we see that in Denmark or in UK, even in Denmark in the nurses we find that they're above 90%. There is no reason why it should be so. So definitely the policies has to be formulated in a certain way to incentivize men's participation in this, as well as culturally break those notions of these works being feminine. So broadly, that is what we can say. What should be the specific policies that needs to be thought about further. I think Siddik, you are not audible.
Oh, sorry. Now is it audible? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's audible.
I was actually responding that the very essence of the capitalist structure itself want to have a differential rate. Then only they can actually maximize it. So it's structural.
Yeah, totally agree with you.
Yeah, as rightly pointed that participation is only the mechanism in which we can basically reduce the gap between men and women, as well as the gender division in that sense. Thank you. Atul is having a question, right?
Yes, sir. My question is addressed to Dr. Deepa. In your paper, you brought a phrase, prisoners of love. It reminded me of a debate between Jordan Peterson and Keith Newman. So I was thinking about what was the reason behind the low participation of women, especially to use the term that use welfare socialist democracies in certain fields. So I think that in the case of developing nations, while women are the biggest victims of patriarchy, in the sense that they cannot make a transition towards certain jobs that are tagged as masculine, whereas when we come to the developed nations, the men are the actual victims, I think, of patriarchy itself. Because while women can be, there is no social oppression as such preventing women from making a transition towards any jobs. Because or perhaps the reason why they are predominantly represented in such care jobs, it might be because of the feminine nature associated with such jobs. So can we substantiate this with the help of unemployment rate among men in the case of developed nations?
Can you tell me the unemployment rate of men and women in the developing nations, like if you're aware of, with that, does that show any difference where more women are working and then less men are unemployed? That's what you're trying to basically say from the data?
No, I don't have the unemployment rates as such. What I meant to say was that if we have the unemployment rate, and if we find that among the welfare socialist economies, the unemployment rate among men tend to be higher than that of women, then I think we can draw a conclusion that the reason behind the predominant representation of women in care jobs is because of a tendency among males to not move into such kind of jobs because they are traditionally found to be feminine jobs. So I was asking you whether such a conclusion can be drawn, whether unemployment data can be used for the purpose.
Yeah, unemployment data can be looked into, but then I don't think immediately we can go into a conclusion, because we should kind of look into their socioeconomic conditions and then many other dimensions for the unemployment. One, what you were kind of, if I've understood correctly, the whole, this actually victimizes men. I didn't get to, what does that mean? Like, in turn, if you're trying to say men are more unemployed, then they are victimized. That is the thing. Another thing is that that's what we are arguing. Like, there is no need for a developed country which still follows, like when they, especially you see in Denmark, where inequality among social groups are very less. But still, there is a kind of a continuity of women being, in paid care work. And then one of my co-author also was saying in his answering is about, for example, a profession like dental. I don't think that is necessarily women have to still continue kind of, into that sector. So there could be lots of things, they can be changed, but then that is why we bring in both cultural and economic aspects, because it's not, development countries in terms of economy, they are doing well, but then it is not that culturally the data shows they have come out of this whole understanding of feminine work, which is connected to care work. That's why I also tried mentioning care work should not be it should be seen as a work, and you should also be able to understand that how this care work is very much important in the production, productive activity of capitalism, and then see it as, as a kind of important activity in the human everyday life, and not see it as a feminized work. But still it is continued to seen as a feminized work, and that is where we have to kind of question this whole cultural notion of it to break it. And then it is very important to, it is very hard to break it, because there is a continued economic aspects to it, where you continue to pay it very less. So that is where it needs a very important kind of larger discussion in terms of policy, in terms of social norms, to bring that change.
Now, I also have a question towards Shonima. This is a question. This is only an observation, because you were talking about this time use. Have you looked into the class caste characterization of this particular time use pattern of difference, like women and men are being employed?
Okay, in the case of time use data, they does not provide, close look at the caste and caste ways, informations like how the different caste or different class people distribute their time and all. So the information level itself, the database is very tricky, and it does not provide that kind of detailed analysis and all those things.
Do you have any interest in actually looking at, field work based, observation? Because then only it will be a reflection.
Yeah, exactly.
Micro level.
Yeah, it's a point.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the observation.
I think thank you, Deepa, Aparajay, and Aparajay, Aparajay and Shonima, for your interesting work, especially on the work of care work and the division of labor aspect. So thank you so much for
Thank you.
presenting.
Thank you very much.
I'll invite now Manu Prathap to deliver the vote of thanks.
So am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. A very good evening to one and all present here. I, on behalf of Department of Economics, University of Kerala, and the entire fraternity of economics together, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all speakers for disseminating your work and findings with us. I would like to thank Atulya, first MA Economics, for welcoming us into this insightful session. Then I would like to thank Sri Siddik Rabiyath, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, University of Kerala, for moderating this very valuable and insightful session. I may like to express my sincere thanks to Deepa E. and Aparajay, Madras Institute of Development Studies, for giving us excellent coverage on gendered paid care work in advanced capitalist country, lessons from UK and Denmark. We would like to take this opportunity to place a record on hearty thanks to Shonima Nelliat, Center of Development Studies, for her excellent coverage on the gender division of labor and overview of Indian women's time allocation. And finally, I would like to thank each and everyone for participating this session and making this session a memorable one. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.